If you can say this sentence in perfect Italian, I'll give you 1 Bitcoin for every word.
Richard Silverton's laughter rang through the marble hall of Carnegie, rich and careless, the kind that made people join in even if they didn't get the joke. The billionaire leaned against the black Steinway, his cufflinks glinting like small suns under the chandeliers. He liked the feel of the room, the velvet hush, the ripe attention. Power was a language, and tonight he was fluent. He had been telling stories about money, risk, and the kind of power that made people lean closer, buying out a rival with a smile, shorting a stock from a phone call on a runway tarmac, rescuing a failing foundation with a check whose number made the board weep with relief. People laughed when he wanted them to, murmured when he preferred the weight of awe. Then, spotting movement near the back, his gaze sharpened. Before we go on, tell us, where are you watching from? Follow our channel so you won't miss the next story. Tales of love, redemption, and second chances. A young waitress was passing quietly between tables, clearing empty glasses onto a silver tray. She wore a navy uniform and soft shoes that made no sound. A small scar crossed the knuckle of her right hand, old kitchen burn, maybe, and her hair was pinned back with a clip that had lost a pearl. She knew the roots through the room the way a violinist knows fingerboards, where the chairs tilted, where the carpet rose, where laughter spilled and where it soured. Richard's grin curved into something dangerous. "Hey!" he called suddenly, his voice booming through the gala. "You there?" The waitress. She froze. Dozens of heads turned. The clink of glass stopped. "Come here," Richard said, his tone lazy, commanding. "Come on, let's have a moment." She hesitated, then obeyed, because what else could she do? Her name was Claire Hernandez, 32, single mother, working the night shift to pay rent, tips paid for sneakers that didn't blister her son's heels, and for a space heater that made winter bearable. She could feel the eyes of the rich sliding over her like cold light. When she reached the foot of the stage, Richard smiled as if he were about to perform a magic trick. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, raising his glass. "Let's have a little fun." He turned back to Claire. "Tell me, miss, do you speak Italian?" Her eyes widened. "No, sir. Not really." "Pity," he said, feigning disappointment, the twinkle in his eye calibrated for the cameras he'd invited. Then he chuckled. "Because if you could say one sentence in perfect Italian, I'd give you 1 Bitcoin for every word." The crowd reacted at once. Murmurs, gasps, then laughter that spread like perfume through the air. 1 Bitcoin per word," someone repeated. "That's what? $250,000 for a sentence if it's long enough?" "She won't even know what language he means," another said. "He could say it's Sanskrit and who'd know the difference?" Richard lifted his chin and raised his voice. "The sentence is simple," he declared. "Say, love is worth more than gold. Do that perfectly, and you'll walk out of here with a Bitcoin for each word you get right. We'll count them." The audience tittered. Women leaned toward one another, whispering. Valerie Easton, draped in a scarlet gown, smirked from the front row. "Oh, Richard," she said, laughing softly. "Don't tease the staff." "I'm not teasing," Richard replied smoothly. "I'm giving her a chance to earn more than she's ever made in her life. Isn't that generous?" More laughter. Claire stood rooted, cheeks burning, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. She had practiced this kind of silence for years. It had gotten her through a manager who thought schedules were favors, through landlords who smiled too long before naming a number, through courtrooms where paper decided whether a man could see his child. Tonight, the silence felt like glass she was balancing on. "Go on," Richard said, voice low and coaxing. "Just say it. Love is worth more than gold. If you say it in perfect Italian, I'll send you a Bitcoin per word, right here, tonight." The mockery grew thick enough to choke on. Maybe she thinks Bitcoin is a kind of coin you clean, Valerie murmured. Or a dessert, a man added. Baked Alaska, bananas Foster, Bitcoin, yes, bring two. Claire stared down at her reflection in the polished piano lid. The room blurred around her, but one thought began to take shape through the noise. He thinks I'm nothing. Before we continue, tell us, where are you watching from? Follow this channel for more stories about pride, courage, and the moments that change everything. Richard tilted his head, savoring her silence. No words? He asked, smirking. That's what I thought. Don't worry, sweetheart, Italian isn't for everyone. A burst of laughter followed, sharp, rehearsed, cruel. And that's when something inside Claire shifted. A memory surfaced, her father's voice, warm and patient, the smell of tomato and basil and steam from a pot that made their tiny kitchen feel like a church. He would point to pictures in a tattered children's book and tap the words with a careful finger. Say it with me, Piccola. Amore. Amore. A whisper from long ago. She looked up. Her tray no longer shook. For the first time that night, she met Richard Silverton's eyes without flinching. The hall shimmered under crystal light. Every face in the crowd, every jeweled neckline and polished shoe seemed turned toward Claire. From the balcony, a cellist who'd performed at the start of the evening leaned forward, bow forgotten at her side. The lighting tech paused with a slider mid-air. Even the bartender, halfway through a pour, let the champagne thread into foam without looking. Richard Silverton leaned casually on the piano, his expression that of a man who owned not just the stage, but the people watching it. Come closer, he said, his voice smooth as champagne. Claire took one slow step, then another. The floor gleamed beneath her feet like ice. The tray felt heavier with every breath. She put it down on a side table with a practiced, almost invisible motion and wiped a damp palm against her apron, a quiet act of choosing her footing. Don't be shy, Richard said. It's just a little language game. 3 seconds of courage, and who knows, you might walk out of here rich. Valerie Easton, in her scarlet gown, laughed softly and leaned toward another guest. Courage? She probably doesn't even own a phone that can hold a crypto wallet. The guests laughed. Their laughter was elegant, controlled, like the sound of glasses clinking, decorous even in its cruelty. A man in a navy tux raised his glass and said, Come on, sweetheart, say ciao. That's Italian enough for us. Another voice joined in. Or maybe she can try pizza. That counts, doesn't it? Laughter erupted again. Richard smirked and nodded as if enjoying a fine performance. He had a way of making other people's discomfort feel curated. Claire's throat tightened. She glanced at the marble floor, her reflection faint beneath her. For a moment she wished she could melt into the pattern of the stone and vanish. But then she remembered her son, Miguel, waiting at home, asleep on a thin mattress under a quilt they'd chosen from a church thrift store. He had a gap in his front teeth and a smile that made hard days loosen their hold. She saw him at the kitchen table pretending to do homework, drawing soccer fields in the margins. She heard him ask, with the seriousness only children possess, Mom, what's Bitcoin? Is it a game? She had laughed then, tired and aching, and said, It's not for us. Tonight the joke had found them. The mockery grew louder, echoing off the gilded walls. She's going to faint, Valerie said, fanning herself. Maybe she'll cry instead, another woman added. I heard it's very in this season. Richard gestured for silence with one elegant motion of his hand. The room obeyed. Now, he said, savoring every word. The sentence is, say it with me, everyone. Love is worth more than gold. And, because I am, if nothing else, a man of specifics, should she pronounce each word perfectly in Italian, she will receive 1 Bitcoin for each correct word. We'll have our conductor confirm. The crowd repeated it in English, like an audience at a show. The Italian conductor in the front row, an elderly man with silver hair and a face lined by the soft patience of metronomes, clasped his hands, already wary of the game. "Now," Richard said, turning to Claire again, "in Italian." She said nothing. "What's wrong?" he asked, smiling with edges. "Surely you've heard it in a movie or two. Or is Italian too foreign for you?" A soft ripple of laughter followed. Claire's heart pounded. The memory of her father teaching her came clearer now. Sitting on the edge of their small bed, his hand guiding hers over a page where the letters looked like black lace. "Ti amo vale più dell'oro," he'd whispered when worry made her small. She had forgotten that phrase for years, but tonight it returned like a spark in the dark, traveling up through every quiet "yes, sir," and every ignored insult, insisting gently, "Remember me." Richard tapped his glass against the piano lid. Once, twice. "Time's running out," he said. "Say it, or admit you can't." Claire looked up at him then, and for the first time, her voice didn't tremble. "You're sure about your promise?" she asked. The room stilled. In the back, a server stopped mid-step with a row of crystal flutes flashing in his hands. Richard's smile widened. "1 Bitcoin per word," he said, "if you say it perfectly." "And everyone here heard you?" Claire asked again. "They did," he replied, glancing around. "Hundreds of witnesses. The offer stands. Per word as stated." He grinned as if magnanimity was a trick he'd just taught himself. He raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to learn if our waitress is secretly a linguist." More laughter. But something in the air had begun to shift. A few people near the front row stopped smiling. A man whispered to his wife, "Look at her eyes." A violinist in the gallery pressed a hand to her mouth, without knowing why. The conductor closed his eyes, as if listening for a note he'd once loved. Claire set her tray down on the corner of the piano, with a faint metallic clink. Her hands were empty now. Her breathing slowed. She thought of the first winter after Miguel was born, when the radiator died, and she kept him warm by wrapping him against her chest, while steam from a stew they couldn't afford to eat yet made a room into a shelter. She thought of the apartment above theirs where a couple argued in Spanish and then laughed and then sang, and how sound travels through ceilings the way courage travels through fear. Thin at first, then undeniable. She stepped closer, and though her uniform was plain, her presence seemed to rise until it filled the room. Richard watched, the smile still frozen on his lips. But somewhere behind his amusement, a flicker of unease began to form. "Go on, then," he said softly, almost a whisper now. "Show us." The crowd held its breath. "Beautiful. You're going to love this part." For a moment, nothing moved. The chandeliers hummed softly, their crystals trembling in the faint vibration of silence. Someone coughed. It sounded too loud, and then they apologized in a whisper, as if in church. Claire stood before Richard Silverton, hands steady now, her eyes calm and deep. She saw the night in layers, the rich and the servers, the stage and the scullery, the marble and the mop. Her father's voice walked through the room and stood beside her the way a faithful friend stands without asking questions. The crowd leaned in, waiting for the inevitable embarrassment, the stumble, the wrong word, the proof that the world was exactly as they believed, divided between those who belonged and those who served. But that wasn't what happened. Claire drew a breath. Then, in a voice soft but unshakably clear, she said, "L'amor vale più dell'oro." The words fell through the air like a small prayer, not rushed, not rehearsed. Perfect. They seemed to wring off the guilt and the velvet and the pride that had gathered like smoke in the rafters, and they cut through it clean. A second passed, stretched taut and shining. Then the Italian conductor in the front row, An elderly man with silver hair and a lifetime of music in his hands whispered aloud, awestruck, "Perfect! Flawless!" Richard blinked. His grin faltered. "Say that again," he said. Claire met his eyes. "L'amor vale più dell'oro," she repeated, slower this time, each syllable laid down like a stone you could cross a river on. Her accent held the softness of Naples and the clarity of New York sidewalks. It didn't sound borrowed. It sounded returned. A murmur spread through the crowd, replacing laughter with something heavier. Respect, disbelief, maybe even guilt. A woman in emerald earrings lowered them with a wince, as if the jewels themselves had grown loud. A young tech investor looked at his phone, then his date, then the floor, realizing there are kinds of wealth not stored in ledgers. Valerie Easton set down her glass too quickly. The stem snapped in her hand. She memorized it," Valerie said, voice high, brittle. "Someone must have told her." The conductor shook his head. No one could fake that accent. It's not learned, it's remembered." Richard's jaw tightened. The lines around his mouth deepened. "Who taught you that?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "My father," Claire said. Her voice trembled slightly now, not from fear but from memory. "He was Italian. He used to tell me that sentence when we didn't have much to eat. He said love was still worth more than gold." The words sank into the silence like drops into water. Somewhere, a camera's red light blinked alive. A reporter, who had come expecting another easy story about excess dressed as charity, felt her throat burn. Then someone in the back began to clap, once, twice. Others joined, uncertain at first, then stronger. Applause built slowly, spreading like a tide until it filled the hall. It wasn't for spectacle anymore. It was for recognition, the kind given when truth stands up in a room that didn't invite it. Richard stood motionless. He had created a spectacle, and somehow become the fool in it. "That's impressive," he said at last, his smile stiff. "But I wasn't serious, of course. It was just a bit of fun." The clapping stopped. The mood shifted again, sharp as a turn of wind. The word fun dropped like a coin down a well and didn't make a sound when it hit. A man near the front row said, "You made the offer, Mr. Silverton. We all heard you." "Yes," another voice called. "A promise is a promise, and you said per word." "Keep your word," shouted someone else. "Per word, per word." The chant gathered strength. Richard's smirk wavered. The audience that once adored him had turned into his jury. The numbers, so friendly to him in the daylight of his spreadsheets, had come to sit in judgment at night. 4 words, 4 coins. Claire didn't speak. She simply stood there, silent and steady, letting the weight of his own arrogance press against him. The silence belonged to her now. Even Valerie felt it, and shrank inside her scarlet brilliance, trying to make herself small enough not to be seen by whatever seeing had begun in the room. The Italian conductor rose to his feet and said quietly, "Signore, she honored your challenge. Perfectly. L'amor vale più dell'oro. 4 words. You owe 4. The hall fell still again. Every gaze turned to Richard. A boy who'd refilled water glasses all night clutched his tray closer and mouthed the words under his breath as if tasting a spell. Richard looked at Claire, the woman he'd mocked, the cleaner he thought invisible, and saw something in her face that unsettled him. Dignity, unbought and unbent. It didn't glare. It glowed. He reached for the piano as if to lean, then thought better of it. His hand hovered in midair like a lie that didn't want to land. "Ladies and gentlemen," he tried again, forcing charm into his tone, "surely we can agree this was a jest. A gala needs lightness." No one laughed. The chandeliers seemed to lean away from him. From the back of the hall, someone called, "A man's word isn't a joke, Richard. You named the price." The room murmured in agreement. The words per word threaded through the crowd until they were everywhere. Claire's eyes didn't leave his. She wasn't hunting victory. She was holding a line. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but carried through every corner of the room. "You said you'd do it," she said. "I believed you." The way she said believed made something inside him tilt, as if he'd been walking for years on a floor that was actually a slope and had only now understood why he was tired. He felt the strange vertigo of a man who'd bought noise his whole life and was hearing quiet for the first time. The crowd waited. No one moved. He sighed, the sound of a man deflating under his own weight. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the gesture finally stripped of flourish. "Fine," he muttered, and then louder to the room. "We'll settle it as promised. 4 words, 4 coins." Gasps rippled across the audience as he opened his crypto wallet app. The photographer at the edge of the stage raised his camera. The red light in the back corner multiplied. 3, 5, 10 people were filming now, not out of malice but out of awe, the way people record a sunrise as if they could save the light. "This is history," the man whispered. "Don't stop filming." Richard's thumb hovered for a second over the screen. He glanced up at Claire. She didn't flinch. He pressed send once, twice, 3 times. 4. Each transfer confirmed with a quiet ding that sounded louder than an orchestra. He looked up, his face pale under the chandelier's golden glow. "There," he said. "Payment complete, per word." Applause erupted, first hesitant, then thunderous. But this was not the polite applause of polite society. It was wild, cathartic, human. It ran up the walls and shook the dust from the moldings. A server laughed and cried at the same time. The conductor sat down heavily and covered his face with both hands. Claire bowed her head slightly, not in servitude, but in gratitude. She whispered, "Thank you." And in that instant the crowd saw what power had never shown them. Grace. The sound of clapping swelled until it shook the chandeliers. Then, slowly, it broke apart into smaller waves, sniffles, murmurs, the rustle of silk. A woman in pearls touched Claire's elbow and said, "Brava!" and meant it with a tenderness that surprised even herself. Claire stood still. She didn't bask in it, didn't pose for cameras. She simply breathed, her hands folded over her apron, her eyes shining but steady. For her, the victory wasn't money, it was visibility. For one fleeting night, the room had seen her. Across the stage, Richard Silverton lowered his phone. His pulse hammered in his throat. He had built towers that touched clouds, moved markets with a phone call, but right now, he could barely meet the gaze of a woman in a service uniform. The gold veneer of his world looked suddenly thin, like paint rubbed to metal at the edges. Valerie Easton rose from her seat, her voice trembling. "Richard, darling, this has gone far enough. Sit down. They'll forget by morning." He didn't answer. The arrogance had drained from him, leaving something raw behind, a man confronting the first honest reflection of his life. He stepped closer to Claire. The audience held its breath. His mouth opened, closed. When he spoke, the words came out quieter than any he'd said all night. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I meant to humiliate you. I thought it was clever." Claire looked at him, not with anger, but with something deeper. Pity softened by grace. "You don't owe me anything more than your word," she replied. "You kept that tonight. That's enough." Her voice reached places no accusation could. The room shifted again, not in volume, but in temperature, warmer by a degree you could feel in your bones. "You believed me," he repeated, almost whispering, as if tasting the words for the first time. The Italian conductor wiped his eyes and said softly, "Signorina, your father would be proud." Claire smiled faintly. "He always said love is worth more than gold." I guess tonight that was true. Richard exhaled, a sound that began like a laugh but ended closer to a confession. The crowd's applause had faded, leaving behind a hush thick with something unspoken. No orchestra, no champagne chatter, just breathing, 100 people holding air in their throats, not sure whether they'd just witnessed humiliation or redemption. He stepped back, glancing toward the glass doors at the end of the hall, where the winter night pressed like an audience of its own. Snow had begun to fall, soft, steady, deliberate. Funny, he thought, how the world never waited for you to change. It simply kept snowing. "You've just given me a lesson," he said finally, his voice trembling on its edges. "That I couldn't buy with all the gold in this city." Claire tilted her head, studying him the way one studies a sound that doesn't quite match the memory of it. His eyes had lost their polish. There was no show left in him, only a man realizing the price of his own pride. Around them, the guests began to stir. Someone coughed. Someone else reached for a coat, whispering. A few people clapped again, timidly, not sure what emotion to land on. But the tone had changed. No one was laughing now. A journalist whispered to the photographer, "Get this shot, the billionaire and the waitress. It's not about the Bitcoin anymore. It's about humanity." Flashbulbs flickered, small lightning strikes over marble and crystal. But the picture that mattered most wasn't captured on film. It was the quiet understanding that passed between the two of them. Claire gathered her tray again. The metal felt lighter now, almost kind. She had carried emptiness all night, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. Before she turned to leave, she said softly, "Good night, Mr. Silverton." He answered after a long pause, "Good night, Ms. Hernandez." Two worlds that had collided in cruelty now parted with something close to respect. The applause that followed her exit wasn't roaring or grand. It was steady, grateful, the kind reserved for truth. That night, the city outside shimmered with light. A limousine waited at the curb for Richard. A bus wheezed to a stop for Claire. Each moved in opposite directions through the same snow. But something, neither could name what, had shifted in both of them. Weeks turned into months, and the video of that night traveled faster than rumor ever could. A billionaire humbled, a waitress speaking flawless Italian, 4 words worth 4 Bitcoin, and a lifetime's worth of meaning. Television anchors debated it, podcasters dissected it. Headlines screamed, "The woman who made a billionaire pay his word." Clips replayed the moment her voice filled the hall, subtitled in every language. Some called it poetic justice, others called it performance. But to those who had felt invisible, it was a small miracle. Claire Hernandez refused all interviews. She didn't chase fame or profit. She still worked nights for a while, saving, planning, learning to let peace feel real. She deleted hundreds of emails from TV producers who wanted the humble waitress with the heart of gold. Humility, she thought, didn't need a microphone. Sometimes on her break, she'd pull out her phone and open her crypto wallet. The balance glowed quietly on the screen. 4,000 BTC. She didn't touch it, not once. It wasn't fortune, it was symbol. The night her dignity became visible. One dawn, as the first train screamed beneath Queens, she made a decision. With the help of a friend from church, Maria, a retired teacher with steady eyes and gentle hands, she rented a narrow storefront between a bakery and a barber shop. They scrubbed it clean, painted the walls in soft yellow, and hung a wooden sign hand-lettered in blue, L'Amour Academy. Her motto, painted just above the door, read, "Words have worth. Use them to lift, not wound." Her first class had 8 students, a cab driver from Ghana, a single mother from Haiti, a retired nurse, and a teenage boy who came with his grandmother just to keep her company. They sat at old desks she'd found online for free, each with a chipped corner and a story of its own. Claire taught with patience, laughter, and memory. She told them about the power of words, how they can shame or shelter, burn or heal. Every lesson ended the same way. She'd say softly, "What's love worth?" And the students, some shy, some smiling, would answer together, "More than gold." Far uptown, Richard Silverton watched the world carry on without him at its center. His name still opened doors, but fewer now. Some invitations stopped coming. He'd resigned from several boards, citing philosophical differences, though the truth was simpler. He couldn't bear his own reflection in those marble rooms. The empire still ran. Yes. His signature still meant millions. But the man had changed. He had stopped wearing arrogance the way others wear cologne. It no longer fit. He began to visit shelters, not the glamorous charity galas where cameras blinked, but the quiet ones, the ones that smelled of coffee and bleach. He spoke with men who had lost everything, with women who were rebuilding piece by piece. Sometimes he listened without talking at all. That was new for him. Listening felt like repentance. He had framed a photo from that night, the one where Claire stood beside him, eyes calm, hands folded, while he looked like a man remembering how to stand upright. It sat on his desk, next to a half-drunk glass of water that he refilled himself now. One gray afternoon, he appeared at the door of L'Amour Academy. The bell above the entrance jingled. The room smelled faintly of chalk and lemon polish. Claire looked up from a stack of textbooks. For a heartbeat, the years folded. Billionaire and Waitress, again in the same light. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Richard smiled, small and genuine. "I came to return something," he said. He held out a framed photograph. The newspaper's front page from that night, headline faded but still visible. "4 words worth more than gold." "You taught me something I should have known," he said quietly. "That respect isn't charity. It's truth. I wanted to thank you. In person." Claire set the photo gently on a shelf. The students behind her pretended to read, but watched with wide eyes. "You already did," she said. "That night." He hesitated, then drew a small envelope from his coat pocket. "I'm funding scholarships," he said. "For anyone who wants to learn here but can't afford to. Anonymous donations. No headlines. No cameras. If you'll let me." Claire considered him for a long moment. She saw the man who once thought humiliation was entertainment, and the man now standing awkwardly in her classroom, clutching an envelope like an apology. "On one condition," she said. "Anything," he replied. "You take a class yourself." He blinked, then laughed. Not the polished kind that filled ballrooms, but a real, uneven laugh. "Deal," he said. Months later, during the Academy's first year-end recital, someone filmed on a phone. The video would later circulate quietly online. Not viral, not scandalous, just beautiful. There was Claire at the whiteboard, her students repeating Italian phrases after her. And at the back of the room, sitting slightly hunched in a too-small chair, was Richard Silverton. He stumbled through the words, his accent clumsy but sincere. When he mispronounced amore, everyone laughed, kindly this time, and he joined them. When the final lesson ended, Claire asked everyone to stand. "Repeat with me," she said, smiling, "the sentence that started it all." Together, voices of every age and accent filled the small room. "L'amor val più dell'oro." Applause followed, soft, honest, full of life, the kind that doesn't echo but settles. The camera lingered on Richard, clapping, eyes shining with something like peace. And then it found Claire, closing her book, looking at her students as though she'd just watched a field bloom from nothing. That night at Carnegie Hall, the narrator of the video said quietly, was supposed to prove a point about power. Instead, it revealed a truth about worth. Dignity doesn't wear a uniform. Respect costs nothing, and changes everything. And sometimes all it takes is one sentence, spoken with heart, to turn arrogance into grace. The screen faded to the image of Claire locking up the academy. The city lights shimmered on the wet sidewalk. She paused, looked upward, and whispered one last time, not to anyone there, but to the father who had taught her long ago. Ti amo vale più dell'oro. If this story moved you, follow for more tales of love, forgiveness, and the moments that remind us who we can still become. Comment below, amore, because some words, and some hearts, are worth more than anything money can buy.